The steady hum of cicadas fills the warm Georgia air as I sip my morning coffee on the back porch, the scent of magnolias drifting in on the breeze. My backyard, a lush sanctuary of towering oaks and crimson maples, stretches before me, bathed in the golden light of the rising sun. Birds flit between the branches, their songs weaving into the peaceful rhythm of my morning routine. For the past 2 years, this home has been my refuge. A place of quiet after long days in court, where I trade legal battles for the slow, deliberate act of tending my garden. I earned this peace. But peace is fragile. And in this neighborhood, it comes with conditions. Oak Crest is one of those picturesque, HOA-controlled communities where everything looks perfect on the surface. Wide, manicured lawns, white picket fences, a homeowners association that ensures property values stay high and some residents stay in their place. I learned quickly that some residents meant people like me. It was in the small things at first. The hesitant smiles from certain neighbors. The way conversations would drift to an awkward stop when I joined the block parties. The subtle way the HOA newsletter always seemed to single out certain homes for minor infractions, mine included. I brushed it off. I had fought bigger battles in the courtroom than an overzealous HOA. But then came her, Carol Whitman, HOA president, self-appointed gatekeeper of Oak Crest, and the kind of woman who wielded neighborhood rules like a personal weapon. She had the tight, stretched smile of someone who'd never been told no in her life, and the condescending tone of someone who thought their opinion was law. I had my first real run-in with her last spring when she left a warning on my doorstep, an official-looking HOA violation notice. My grass, she claimed, was 2 inches above regulation height. I laughed it off, trimmed it, let it go. But the notices kept coming. My driveway had excess debris, a single bag of mulch. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black, even though it was identical to my neighbor's. When I questioned her, she'd smile, tilt her head, and remind me, "Rules are rules, dear. We must maintain our standards." I could smell the unspoken words beneath them. Still, I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Until this morning. Because this morning, something is wrong. My birds aren't singing. The shade that usually drapes my yard in a cool embrace is gone. I step onto the grass, heart pounding. The earth feels raw beneath my feet. And then I see it. My trees. My beautiful, towering trees. Gone. Nothing but fresh stumps and scattered sawdust remain. A sick, burning rage coils in my stomach. My fingers curl into fists. And standing on my driveway, clipboard in hand, is Carol Whitman, smiling. For a long, stretched second, I can't move. My breath catches in my throat as I take in the devastation. Where my trees once stood, there's nothing but open sky and raw, exposed stumps. My backyard, once a haven of shade and life, now feels naked, vulnerable, violated. The scent of fresh cut wood still lingers in the air, sharp and sacrilegious. Carol Whitman stands in my driveway, clipboard in hand, her pastel cardigan draped neatly over her shoulders. She doesn't look at the stumps. No, she's looking at me, like she's waiting for a reaction. I give her nothing. "Morning, Judge Monroe," she says, all saccharine sweetness, the corners of her mouth curling in a polite, practiced smile. She always says my title like it's a joke, a game she's playing to remind me that here, in her neighborhood, my authority means nothing. I force my voice to stay even. "Carol, what happened to my trees?" Her eyebrows lift in feigned surprise. "Oh dear. You didn't get my notice?" My stomach tightens. There was no notice. I step closer, feeling the heat rising beneath my skin. "No, I didn't." "Who authorized this?" She tuts, flipping a page on her clipboard. "Well, as HOA president, it's my duty to enforce community beautification standards. Your trees, lovely as they were a liability. Overgrown branches, potential root damage, you understand." I clench my jaw. My trees were healthy. I had them inspected by an arborist just last year. But I know better than to argue with her logic, because logic isn't what this is about. She tilts her head, eyes gleaming. "And Well, let's be honest. They were blocking the street view. A few neighbors expressed concerns. Concerns. I already know which neighbors she means. The same ones who never quite meet my eye at community meetings. The ones who smile too tightly when I walk my dog past their driveways. I glance around, and sure enough, a few curtain edges flutter closed. Spectators. Watching. Waiting. I swallow down the anger clawing its way at my throat. You had no right, I say, my voice dangerously low. Carol's smile tightens. Oh, but I did. It's all right here in the HOA bylaws. She taps her clipboard like it's a holy text. Article 6, Section 3. The HOA reserves the right to remove any landscaping deemed non-compliant. And since you never formally submitted a request to plant those trees in the first place. She trails off, watching me, waiting for me to break. I won't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I inhale slowly, letting the rage settle into something sharper, more precise. Because something isn't right. She's too smug, too prepared. And the fact that she did this without my knowledge? Without any record of notice? She thinks she's won. She thinks I can't fight back. But she doesn't know who she's dealing with. I don't argue.
Not yet.
I just stare at her, letting the silence stretch, making her feel the weight of it. Carol shifts her stance, but the smirk never leaves her face. She's confident. Too confident. I take a slow step forward. You cut down my trees without notice. That's destruction of property. Carol lets out a light, patronizing laugh. Now, let's not get dramatic. It's just landscaping, dear. She flips another page on her clipboard. And, as I said, all within HOA regulations. I glance down at the paperwork. A single-page document with a bold heading, Enforcement Action, Unauthorized Landscaping Removal. At the bottom, there's a signature line.
Mine.
Only I never signed it. I keep my expression neutral, but inside, my pulse pounds.
Forgery.
Carol watches me carefully, reading my reaction. She knows exactly what she's done. I take another step. This is illegal, Carol. She clicks her tongue, feigning sympathy. Oh, Judge Monroe, I understand you're upset. But as you know, legal battles can be tricky, lengthy, and you wouldn't want to make this personal, would you? There it is. The veiled threat. I tilt my head, studying her. Is that a warning? Her smile sharpens. It's just friendly advice. This is a community, after all. We all have to get along. I want to rip that clipboard from her hands, but I don't. Because Carol just made a critical mistake. She underestimated me. I turn on my heel and walk away. Not in defeat. In calculation. Carol watches me go, still smug. She thinks she's shut me down. She has no idea what's coming. I spend the next 6 hours gathering evidence. I pull up my email records, no prior notices from the HOA. I check the HOA portal, no meeting minutes discussing my trees. I make calls to the local landscaping companies, and sure enough, I find one that remembers the job. A young man named Luis answers the phone. When I ask who authorized the tree removal, there's a pause. Then, quietly, he says, "The lady from the HOA. She said it was an emergency order. But something fell off, so I took pictures before we started. I still have them."
Bingo.
He sends them over. Clear shots of my yard before the destruction. My trees standing tall. A work order without my signature. And then the jackpot. A photo of Carol standing in my driveway, gesturing at the trees, clipboard in hand. I stare at it, adrenaline buzzing in my veins.
Caught.
But I'm not done. Next, I make a call to my neighbor, Evelyn, a retired schoolteacher who's lived here for 20 years. She's one of the few who never treated me differently. "Evelyn," I say after she picks up, "did you see who cut down my trees?" She hesitates. I did. And, a heavy sigh. Carol was out there. Supervised the whole thing. I heard her say, "That'll teach her to ignore my notices." And she laughed. I close my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. There it is. Proof of motive. Would you be willing to say that on record? A pause. Then her voice, firm and clear. Yes. I exhale, the tension in my chest shifting into something else. This isn't just about my trees anymore. This is about power,
Control.
and making sure people like me know our place. Carol thinks she's untouchable. But tomorrow, she's going to learn exactly what happens when you cross the wrong person. Because I'm not just another homeowner. I'm a federal judge. And I know exactly how to take her down. The next morning, I arrive early at the HOA board meeting. It's held in the community clubhouse, a pristine, beige-walled building that smells like lemon polish and self-importance. Carol is already there, seated at the center of a long mahogany table, her usual smug confidence radiating off her in waves. Around her, the rest of the HOA board, 5 older homeowners, all nodding at her words like gospel. She doesn't look surprised to see me. In fact, she smiles. "Judge Monroe, how lovely of you to join us. I assume you're here for the landscaping update." I meet her gaze evenly. That's one way to put it. The board members exchange glances. They sense something's off, but Carol leans back in her chair, completely at ease. She thinks she's won. I set a folder on the table and clasp my hands in front of me. I have a few concerns about the removal of my trees. Carol tilts her head, feigning sympathy. Oh dear. As I explained yesterday, it was a matter of compliance. I'm sure you understand. Rules are rules. I open the folder and slide a printed copy of the work order across the table. This document says I authorize the removal. But as you can see, I tap the signature line. That's not my signature. Carol barely glances at it. Oh, I'm sure it's just a clerical error. I nod. That's what I thought, too. So I made a few calls. Spoke with the landscaping company. They sent me these. I pull out the photographs, one of my trees standing tall before the job, another of Carol herself directing the workers. I slide them across the table. Carol stiffens. It's brief, a flicker of something behind her eyes, but I see it. The board members lean in, murmuring. I keep going. I also spoke to a witness, Evelyn from down the street. She heard you say, and I quote, "That'll teach her to ignore my notices." Silence. The board members shift uncomfortably, looking at Carol now. Doubt creeping in. Carol's lips press into a thin line, but she recovers fast. She lets out a light laugh, shaking her head. This is all a misunderstanding. I was simply enforcing regulations. Evelyn must have misheard. I cut her off. And that's the other thing. I checked the HOA bylaws. There is no rule requiring the removal of trees that don't obstruct pathways or pose a safety hazard. My trees were in full compliance. Carol opens her mouth, but I hold up a hand. And do you know what happens when someone forges a signature? Or illegally destroys property? It's called fraud. Destruction of private property. And since this impacted my home, a federal property under judicial protection laws, we might even be looking at a felony. Carol's face drains of color. For the first time, she's not in control. She shifts in her seat, grasping for an out. Now, let's not be hasty, Judge Monroe. Surely, we can handle this within the community. I lean forward, my voice calm but cutting. You made sure to weaponize HOA rules against me. You wanted me to feel powerless. But you underestimated me, Carol. I don't just know the law, I enforce it. I sit back, letting my words sink in. The board members murmur among themselves, clearly rattled. Then, just as Carol starts to speak again, the clubhouse doors swing open. Luis, the landscaper, steps inside. Right behind him, a uniformed officer. I finally allow myself a small smile. And I think we'll be handling this a little differently than you expected. Carol swallows hard. For the first time, she looks afraid. Carol's face is a mask of forced composure, but I see the cracks forming. The color in her cheeks fades as she glances between me, Luis, and the uniformed officer now standing in the doorway. The other HOA board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. The room is no longer hers to control. I break the silence. This, I say, tapping the stack of evidence in front of me, isn't just an HOA dispute. This is fraud. destruction of private property. And given the forged signature, we're talking criminal intent. Carol forces a laugh, but there's a tremor in it. Now, Judge Monroe, let's be reasonable. I'm sure there's no need to escalate this into something.
I hold up a hand.
It's already escalated. You did that when you falsified documents, ordered unauthorized work, and targeted me under the guise of regulations. I lean forward slightly, my voice steady, unwavering. And the best part? You left behind a paper trail. The officer steps forward, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. Ma'am, we have reason to believe that an illegal removal of property occurred under your direct orders. He gestures to Luis, who clears his throat and pulls out his phone. I recorded the call, Luis says, his voice calm but firm. When she hired us, she said the homeowner had already approved everything. But something fell off, so I kept the receipts. He taps his screen, and suddenly, Carol's own voice fills the room. Get those trees down by noon. The homeowner won't be an issue. I'll handle it. The board members' faces shift, from discomfort to shock. Carol's nails dig into the table, her knuckles white. I let the silence drag out. Then I ask, would you like to explain that, Carol? Her mouth opens and closes, but nothing comes out. The smug confidence?
Gone.
Finally, she forces herself to straighten, her fingers tightening around her clipboard like it's a life raft. This is a misunderstanding, she insists, her voice higher than before. I was simply enforcing the rules. If Luis misinterpreted. I shake my head. Cut the act. You were caught lying, forging my signature, and illegally destroying my property. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime. The officer nods. We'll be investigating further, but given the evidence presented today, you may want to consider legal counsel, Mrs. Whitman. Carol's face twists. She turns to the board, desperate now. Are you all seriously going to stand by and let this happen? After everything I've done for this community. The board members look at each other, uncertainty thick in the air. For years, Carol ruled Oak Crest with an iron grip, weaponizing rules and fear.
But now?
She's exposed. Evelyn, seated in the back of the room, finally speaks. Her voice is soft, but the words cut deep. You didn't do it for the community, Carol. You did it for control. Carol whirls toward me, her mask slipping entirely. You think you're so untouchable because you're a judge? She hisses. This neighborhood had standards before you moved in. You don't belong here, and you never did. The words hang heavy in the air. Ugly.
Bare.
The real truth behind all of this, finally said out loud. The room shifts. The board member's discomfort turns into something else. Realization. The officer sighs. That's enough, ma'am. Carol glares at him, then at me. Her world is collapsing, and she knows it. This is absurd, she snaps. I've given years to this HOA. Do you think they'll turn against me because of one complaint? I fold my arms. It's not just one complaint. You've bullied and targeted homeowners for years.
But now?
Now there's proof. And you know what happens when a case has enough evidence. I let my words sink in before delivering the final blow. It gets prosecuted. Carol's chest rises and falls in sharp, angry breaths. She looks around, desperate for support. But the board members avert their eyes. The neighbors in attendance whisper amongst themselves. Even the ones who once feared her now see her for what she is. A fraud. A liar. A racist who thought her power made her untouchable. But she was wrong. Because justice always catches up. And Carol Whitman just met hers. Carol Whitman resigns from the HOA by sundown. It isn't a graceful exit. Word spreads fast, faster than even I expected. The moment Luis's recording hits the neighborhood group chat, everything unravels. Neighbors whisper on their porches. The once loyal board members distance themselves, refusing to go down with her. Homeowners she'd bullied for years step forward, sharing their own stories. Unlawful fines. Selective enforcement of rules. Harassment. By the next morning, she's a pariah. 2 days later, a civil lawsuit is filed in county court, my lawsuit. Property destruction, fraud, forgery. The charges are serious, and I have the receipts to back them up. The legal community takes notice. Her past dealings are dredged up. It turns out I'm not the first person she's targeted, just the first person who fought back. Then the final blow, a federal ethics complaint. I made a call, used my network. Carol's husband is a real estate attorney, and some of his cases just so happen to involve HOA disputes, cases where Carol's enforcement led to foreclosures. Now his name is under investigation, too. Their little empire? Cracked wide open. Carol vanishes from the neighborhood soon after. One day, she's in her oversized SUV, glaring over her clipboard. The next, a moving truck sits in her driveway, hauling away the life she built on control and intimidation. No one stops to say goodbye. I stand in my yard, staring at the empty space where my trees once stood. It's strange, the silence. No rustling leaves. No shade. Just absence. But I don't feel defeated. Because I won. A car pulls up. Evelyn steps out, carrying a small sapling in her arms. Thought you could use a replacement, she says, offering me a soft smile. I exhale, something warm blooming in my chest. Not just relief.
Hope.
Neighbors begin to emerge from their houses. Some bring more saplings, others just words of support. A quiet ripple of change spreads through Oak Crest, small but undeniable. For the first time, the weight of being the only one in this neighborhood feels a little lighter. One tree at a time, we rebuild.